I think we will pick it up on Nun Ted Amud Beis with the Mishnah again real quick and then go on from there. Okay, but our sponsors this morning, A Year of Learning, Dr. Paul Koningsberg, in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Reuven ben Lebish, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nissen Hara Nissen ben Fardosa. Paula and Bob Bromberg, in memory of their departed dear friend, Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malcolm Mann, in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. My many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gitler, Avrameir ben Shimon, Cheryl Shur, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva, Marsha Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Uriel Paul Federbush, Uriel ben Harav Shimon. A Month of Learning by Haran and Mel Haller, in memory of her mother, Malka Rachel Bas Yehuda Leib, Adina and Michael Kirshner, in memory of their parents, Florence and Nathan Kirshner, and friend Harriet Friedman, Tova and Leo Zimmer, in memory of her mother, Henya Bas Harav Beryl, and her father, Aaron ben Yosef Mordechai, Perry and Jill Meltzer, in memory of his mother, Malka Bas Baruch, and his sister, Goldalea Bas David Halevi, Carol and Josh Sanborn, in memory of her father, Yehoshua Shia ben Moshe Yehuda HaKohen. Also, today is the 20th, and that is a day of learning sponsored by Helene and David Levitsky, in memory of her father, Yehoshua ben Reb Hirsch Wolf. May the Shemas have an aliyah, Krank Rafia, Velti Yeshua Shem Atliah, and the Chol B'nai Yisrael a good Geben Shtiyar.
Me.
Okay. All right. So I indicated I just needed to get my mind back into the Gemara. Okay, we're going to pick up on Nun Tet Amud Beis. Okay, with the Mishnah, and then we'll go on. Quickly, we saw the previous Mishnah was trying to deal, remember, with the Tamid. When was the Tamid done? If the Pesach Korban could be done after that? Were there other things that could be done after? So on and so forth. And we indicated that this Perek Chamishi focuses a great deal on the issue of the Korban Pesach. Okay? And so it seems, and remember that originally, okay, we did not have the Mishnayot divided up the way we have them in our text, okay, or even in our Gemara. Originally, they could have been all together, all the Mishnayos, and then afterwards, all the Gemara. Okay. The reason I point that out now is may come across a situation where the language in the Gemara is going to refer to Reisha and Seifa, but it's not necessarily the beginning and end of the same Mishnah, but it may actually refer to an earlier or a later Mishnah. Okay? So I want us to keep that idea in mind as we're going to continue today in a moment. Okay? All right, so the Mishnah starts off again. HaPesach sheshachtu shelo lishmo, okay, where the Korban Pesach was slaughtered not for its intent. The kibel, okay, the blood was received, v'halach, transported, v'zarak shelo lishmo, and it also was sprinkled not for its intended purpose. Okay. Oh, or, says the Mishnah, another possibility. lishmo v'lishelo lishmo, for its intended purpose and its non-intended purpose. Okay. O, shelo lishmo v'lishmo, or for its not for its intended purpose and its intended purpose. Okay. Pasul, it is not valid. Okay. Now, having said this, then the Mishnah continued. Ketzad lishmo v'shelo lishmo. How is it possible? What kind of a situation could it be? Both intended purpose and not intended purpose? L'shem Pesach u'l'shem Shlomim. A situation where it was intended for Pesach and intended for Shlomim. Okay, and I'm bringing back Marvin's question yesterday. If we say Kohanim Azrizim, and we explain Zrizim as diligent, that's a problem, a real problem. If we can say that it's simply, Zrizim simply means they're quick to do the avodos, okay, then it may be less of a problem, okay? Because it may be that, let's say the Kohen who collected the blood, all right, did not necessarily say to the Kohen who was transporting it to tell the Kohen who's going to sprinkle it which kind of korban it was. Okay? So that's just one example. Okay? So what happens? Said the Gemara. L'shem Shlomim or l'shem Pesach, ends the Mishnah. Could be perhaps that it was intended for Shlomim, but then afterwards, a later Kohen thought it was being brought on the 14th, okay, in the afternoon, and that maybe it was brought not as a Shlomim, which is a Nadava, okay, but for Pesach. So the Gemara starts off with a Shaila. Gemara by Rav Papa. So Rav Papa asked, U'ba'avoda achat tznan, or b'shtei avodot tznan? Are we talking about, okay, the situation in one particular of the four avodos? Or are we talking the situation of non-intent versus intent in at least two? Ba'avoda achat tznan. If we're saying that it teaches in regards to one avoda, the Rabbi Yossi, then it seems to be the view of Rabbi Yossi. The Amar, who says, Af begemar dvarav adam nitpas, that it's with the ending or the closing statement, okay, that a person is maintained. In other words, if the individual who brought the korban, we said, could have said, I'm bringing this same animal to serve as two different kinds of korbanos, okay? Then, according to Rabbi Yossi, it's only the latter language that's applicable. Okay? The Rabbi Meir, because if it were Rabbi Meir, ha'amar tfus lashon rishon. It's Rabbi Meir who says that one focuses on or grasps the earlier language, okay, the first statement. O Dilma, as we get to Samech Amud Aleph, okay, the top, like we covered this a little bit yesterday, or perhaps B'shtei Avodot Tanan. Perhaps our Mishnah has to be explained in terms of two different, let's call it ritual acts, avodos. Va'afilu l'Rabbi Meir. And then, if that's the case, even according to Rabbi Meir, the Amar Tfos Lashon Rishon, who says, take hold, grab of the earlier language, Hani Mili Ba'avoda Achat, that maybe this regards to one avoda, Aval B'shtei Avodot, but in a situation where Okay, it seemed as if the statement was made because of two different avodos, moded de mifsal, that he would acknowledge then that korban is pasul. Okay, that's where we ended yesterday. Amre ahai. So I will say, on which are we talking about? Inema ashelo lishmo v'lishmo. If we're talking about a situation where it occurs, excuse me, not for its intended purpose and intended purpose, bein ba'avoda achat, bein b'shtei avodot, regardless if we apply it to a single avoda or to two avodas, bein the Rabbi Meir, bein the Rabbi Yossi, regardless if we say it's according to Rabbi Meir, who says the first language, or Rabbi Yossi, who focuses on the later language, if Sale Mikamaita, the korban becomes pasul originally. In other words, from the very first situation. Daha, the Rabbi Yossi, Nami af begamar dvarav adam nitpas. Itle. Why? Because here too, okay, according to Rabbi Yossi, by the later language, a person is sustained, maintained. That's what we say. So if we say that the person bringing the korban said, I'm bringing it for two different, and same animal for two different korbanos, and it's the language of the second one that takes precedence, and therefore we see that it doesn't apply because the even the first avoda, the Kohen doing the shechita, thought it was for a different purpose. Then it's not valid. It's not valid. Ella alishmo v'shelo lishmo mai. Therefore, says the Gemara, if that's the case, regardless of the two of them, it would still be pasul. Okay, why then did our Mishnah have to refer its language to a case where it is on the one hand intended, on the other hand not intended? So the Gemara continues. Tashma, listen to the following Braita to try to clarify. HaPesach sheshchato shelo lishmo. The Korban Pesach, where it was slaughtered without the appropriate intent. V'kibel, and the blood received. V'halach, and it was transported. V'zarak shelo lishmo, and it was sprinkled also not for its intended purpose. Hechidami, how is that situation possible? Inema, if I'm going to say perhaps here also, kidikatani, the way it was taught in our Mishnah, lamali ad mechashev lekuhu. Why do we need to say that it all had to be until they had in mind all the steps, all four avodos? Mikamaita, instead, from the very first ifsale, it became invalid from that very first shelo lishma, from the very first avoda. Ela lav hachi katani. But rather than we have to say, isn't it taught, okay, based on the following idea. HaPesach sheshchato shelo lishmo, the Korban Pesach that got slaughtered not for its intended purpose. Inami, or perhaps also shchato lishmo, that it was slaughtered for its intended purpose. V'kibel, v'halach, v'zarak shelo lishmo. Or, I'm going to say, it was received, the blood, or transported, or sprinkled, not for its intended purpose. inami, are also the following. Shchato, it was slaughtered. V'kibeil, and blood received. V'halach, and transported. Lishmo, all of those three steps of the avoda were done for the intended purpose. V'zarak shelo lishmo, and it was sprinkled not for the intended purpose as a korban pesach, let's say. Dahavia la shtei avodot. That would be an example of where we have a situation of lishmo and shelo lishmo, implying that it's in two, let's say, different avodos. So the Gemara says here, Ema Seifa. I would say, look at this later Mishnah or later Braita. Lishmo v'shelo lishmo. It says for its intended purpose, or not intended purpose. Hechidami, how is that possible? Right? Inema b'shtei avodot. If we say it's in regards to two avodas, hainu reisha. That's similar to what the beginning of the Mishnah says. Ela lav ba'avoda achat. But rather, isn't it not, we're talking about a situation, excuse me, of dealing with a single avoda, v'Rabbi Yossihi. And then that would make it the view of Rabbi Yossi that the later language of the bringer takes precedence. Da'amar, as he says, af begamar dvarav adam nitpas. That here we say with the later language, a person is maintained, sustained. Lo, no, says the Gemara. Le'olam b'shtei avodot. No, we're talking here when we say intend and not intended. We must be talking, says the Gemara, about two, I'll call it for the moment, different avodos. Veresha, and the earlier part of our Mishnah, the Kai B'Shchita, where it deals with our discussion of the first avoda of Shchita, V'kamechashe B'Shchita. And though he was prepared to do the Shchita, his mental mindset, his intent, was regarding the Shchita for something else. Inami, or it's also possible, Kai Bazrika, that he could have thought about being prepared to do the spritzing, right, the sprinkling, V'kamechashe Bazrika. And as he was thinking about it, his mindset, his intent was focused on sprinkling for a different animal, a different korban. Seifa, dekai b'shchita, v'kechashiv b'zrika. It's also possible, says the Gemara, that at the end of our Mishnah, when it says one intended, one not intended, or one not intended and one intended, a possibility that he is preparing to do the shchita, but he's already thinking ahead, and his mindset is already thinking about the sprinkling. The Amar Hareini Shochet et Pesach Lishmo, that he's thinking, I am about to slaughter this animal as the Korban Pesach for that intent. Lizrok Damo Shelo Lishmo. But maybe I'm going to sprinkle it as the purpose of a, let's say, shloming. V'kamashmala. And therefore, if that's the case, this comes to teach us the mechashevin me avodah la'avodah, that it's possible that one can think about a later avoda, I'm saying, while doing an earlier avoda, but in the inappropriate manner. Vahainu ba'ai de Rav Papa. And this really was the intended question that Rav Papa was concerned about. Now, the Gemara comes back to bring us another Braita. Tashma, listen to the following Braita. O shelo lishmo v'lishmo pasul. We said, right, that if it's not for its intended purpose and its intended purpose, it's, right, pasul. It's not valid. Hechidami, how is that possible? Inema, if we're going to say here, bishtei avodot, that we're talking about two different rites, two different ritual acts, avodos. Hashta, lishmo v'shalo lishmo amat pasul. Here you've already said, my language, okay, that for its intent and not intent, you said it was pasul. Shelo lishmo v'lishmo mebaye. Is it necessary then to ask about the situation if you say it's not intent and intended? Okay. Ella, lav ba'avoda achat. Rather, must it not be that we're talking about the situation regarding a single avoda? Umidisefa ba'avoda achat. And since it would appear then that the end of our Mishnah is focused on a single avoda, reisha nami ba'avoda achat. Then the beginning of our Mishnah must, okay, or in this case, the earlier Mishnah, must focus on a single avoda. Gemara answers, lo. No, that's not the case. Le'olam b'shtei avodot. We're dealing with two different ritual acts, two different rites, two different avodos. Ubadinhu, and this seems reasonable. Delo it's tarichle. Okay, that otherwise you wouldn't have needed to say it. Va'ide ditana lishmo v'shelo lishmo, and the fact that it came to teach us a situation of initially intent and afterwards not proper intent. Tananami shelo lishmo v'lishmo. It also then stylistically decided to teach us regarding a situation where it was not appropriate intent and incorrect intent. Okay.
Rabbi Green.
Yes,
suppose he slaughters it and then he has an intent to throw it for another korban. But actually he does, when it comes to throwing it, he changes intent and he throws it for the right korban.
Oh,
Does
good
that make
question.
any difference?
Good question. The only thing I could think of would be once let's take the specifics and I'll tie it into your question, okay? Say he slaughtered it for Korban Pesach. And then in the course of the time, it's not the same Kohen that's going to do all four steps, okay? And then the Kohen who is about to sprinkle it is thinking, oh, I see what animal this is, probably a shlomim. And all of a sudden, the Kohen who did the shechita says, hey, don't you remember? That was supposed to be a Korban Pesach. That's what you're saying. And therefore, the fourth Kohen, oh, yeah, okay. So now I'll sprinkle it for the Korban Pesach. Okay. My thinking would be once that Kohen had a different intent, immediately it rendered it pasul. That's how I would understand the Mishnah in the text. Okay? Good question, Zev. Okay.
To see the actual act.
What? Right, because the intent is what sort of drives the act. Right?
All right.
Okay. Now a new Braita. Tashma, listen to the following. Shchato shelo la'ochlav. Now, here's a little different situation. Remember that for Korban Pesach, people have to be registered, right? They have to have signed up, okay? So what if you have a situation where you get, let's say, 2 families or 3 families together that live in one house, okay? And some of them are able to eat the korban and others are not, okay? For whatever reason, okay? They can't eat it, right? They're, I don't know, they're azav, let's say, for example, okay, that day. And they haven't gotten to the mikveh yet, okay? Whatever. So I'm just trying to clarify as we continue. Tashma, listen to the following braita. Shchato shelo le'ochlav, if one slaughtered it, not for those able to eat it, v'shelo le'menuyav, or not for those that are registered, la'arelim, or here's an example again of somebody who can't, or to those who are uncircumcised, ulatmeim, or those who might still be tameh from some reason, pasul. This would imply that the korban is invalid. Hacha pshita ba'avoda achat. Here, okay, it's very clear from this braita that we're talking about a single avoda, namely the first avoda of shchita. Umideseifa ba'avoda achat. And since we say that here in this case, okay, right, we're talking about the example, the bright that we just said, a single avoda, reishanami ba'avoda achat. Then the earlier examples of Braita or our Mishnah also must be with a single avoda. So the Gemara challenges and says, Midei area, is that really something you can compare it? Ha, kedeita. Here in this case, that's the way it is. Vaha kedeita. And here in this case, it's the way it is. Seifa, okay? In regards to the later Braita or Mishnah, ba'avoda achat. That's clearly with regards to a single avoda. Reisha, our earlier Mishnah, I ba'avoda achat, I b'shtei avodot. Okay, it could be a situation where it might talk about a single avoda, or it might be talking about more than one avoda. So the Gemara continues with another Braita. Tashma, listen to the following. Okay. Braita or Mishnah. Le'ochlav v'shelo le'achlav. He slaughtered it for those who could eat it or those who can't eat it. Kasher, then it's valid. Hechidami, how is that possible? Inema b'shtei avodot. If we're saying here that it's regarding to 2 avodos, v'ta'ama dechashiv bezrika, and the reason is because his mindset, his intent was in regards to the sprinkling. De'ein machshevet ochlin bezrika. But we say that in regards to the intent regarding those who can eat it, it doesn't apply to the concern about sprinkling. Ha, ba'avoda achat, kigon b'shchita. Here then, it must be referring to only a single avoda, namely that of slaughtering. De mahanya be machshevet ochli. That there we do have to consider, okay, the intent in regards to people being able to eat it. If that's the case, that could then become pasul. V'hakaimalam. But here, don't we hold the following? Miktsat ochlin Lo pasla. If you only have a smaller number among all of those that are registered or able to eat it, okay, and it's slaughtered for them, it doesn't render the korban invalid. Ela rather, says the Gemara on Samach Amud Beis, lav ba'avoda achat. Aren't we therefore talking about, right, a single act, a single avoda? Umi desefa ba'avoda achat. And so therefore, since this latter Mishnah, the one we just said, is regards to a single act, Reisha nami ba'avoda achat. Therefore, the earlier Mishnah, okay, our original Mishnah, also must be dealing with a single act. Okay? Gemara, therefore, is saying that the second Mishnah, okay, even according to Rabbi Yossi, okay, would take precedence. Mide area. So the Gemara asks, is that really comparable? Hakedeita, vahakedeita, our same answer. This one is like in this case, and this one is like this case. Seifa, our later Mishnah about eating and non-eaters, right? Ba'avoda achat. That was clearly only dealing with one avoda, namely shchita, varesha. And our earlier, or what I'm calling the original Mishnah, o ba'avoda achat, o b'shtei avoda. It could have been with regards to one avoda or with two avodas. New piece in the Gemara now. Okay? Now, it's not totally over on this discussion, but it's moving to a new example. Ibayalo. So the students in the Beis Midrash asked the following: Pesach sheshchato b'shar yemot hashana. A korban, an animal that would be valid for a korban Pesach, that was slaughtered other days. Lishmo, but its intent was to be used for the korban Pesach. Vishalo lishmo, and also its situation where it was not intended. Mahu, what's the status? Mi ate shalo lishmo umafik le midei lishmo. Question: is it possible that by its occurring, I'm going to say, not for its intended purpose, that it mafik, I'm going to use the word, knocks out, okay, destroys, removes, okay, le midei lishmo, removes it from its status of intended purpose, umachshir le olo, and do we say that it's valid or not? The Gemara tells us, Ki ata Rav Dimi. Rav Dimi used to commute, remember, back and forth and bring Torah Eretz Yisrael to Bavel and vice versa. So when Rav Dimi comes, Amrita l'shma'ata kami de Rabbi Yirmiyah. He said, we mentioned this learning before Rabbi Yirmiyah. Rabbi Yirmiyah was from Eretz Yisrael. Ho'il u'lishmo machshiro bizmano. Since it was intended for its purpose and valid at the appropriate time, v'shelo lishmo machshiro shelo bizmano, and if it's not done for its intended purpose, it's valid not at its intended time. So in other words, that same animal, when it's done for the purpose of Korban Pesach and done on the afternoon of the 14th, that's one thing. But that same animal, okay, that's slaughtered, and it's not done for the Korban Pesach, but maybe done for Shlomim, okay? and therefore it's not done on the 14th, it still could be a valid korban. Okay? Ma lishmo hamachshiro bismano. Okay? I'm sorry. Let's go back. Yeah. All right. Shalishmo machshiro shalo bismano. Ma lishmo hamachshiro bismano. Whereas when it's done for its intended purpose, it validates, I'm going to use the word, the korban in its appropriate time. Ein motzio midei shelo lishmo. It does not push it off, right? It does not destroy its status, okay, from a situation of not intent. Af, likewise, I'm saying, shelo lishmo, when it's not done for its intended purpose, it still also validates shelo bismano, when it's not done in the appropriate time. Ein motzio midei lishmo. And it doesn't remove it from its intended purpose, upasul, and therefore it would become invalid. This is what he said. Va'amarli, this is what Rav Dimi said. Okay. Rav Yirmiyah now responds, lo, that's not the case. Ima marta, b'shelo lishmo, if you're saying that when it's not for its intended purpose, shakei noheg b'chol hazvachim, okay, that it applies to all the other offerings and therefore disqualifies them. Tomar bilishmo, were you going to say that when it's done for its intended purpose, shekain eino noheg b'chol hazvachim, okay, that doesn't apply to all the other offerings. Ela b'pesach bilvad, but only applies towards the korban pesach. Mai havela. So what result then do we have because of this? Amar Rava, says Rava as follows. Okay, the following: Pesach sheshchato b'shar yomot hashana lishmo v'shelo lishmo kasher. Okay, that according to Rava, a korban pesach that was slaughtered on other days of the year for its intended purpose, and then somehow it became not intended, is still valid. Daha stamo lishmo kai. Why? Because its status was basically assumed, accepted, identified, however term we want to translate it, for its intended purpose, and that's what it remains in. Va'afilu hachi, and even in that case, ki shachit le shelo lishmo kasher, even when one were one to slaughter it, okay, not for its intended purpose, it would still be valid. Alma, therefore, says Rava, continuing, ate shelo lishmo, therefore it's telling us, if it comes not for its intended purpose, umafik le midei lishmo, and it knocks out, pushes out it from its right, intended purpose, ki shachit, okay, nami lishmo, v'shelo lishmo, that therefore when it's slaughtered not for its intended purpose, I'm sorry, when it's slaughtered for its intended purpose and not for its intended purpose, ate shelo lishmo, then is going to come the non-intended purpose, umafik le midei lishmo, and knock it out from its intended purpose.
The purpose, right.
Okay? So, at this point, we see as follows. A response. Amar le Rav Ada bar Ahava, the Rava, says to Rava, based on that explanation, Dilma Shani, Heicha da Amar. Perhaps there's a difference where it was clearly orally said, right? Mehecha de lo amar, from a situation where it wasn't orally announced or said. Daha le'ochlav v'shalo la'achlav kasher. Because here, if you say that when it's slaughtered for those who can eat it and cannot eat it, it's still a valid korban. V'kol hecha de shachit le shalo la'achlav lechude pasul. Whereas, I'm saying, wherever it was slaughtered and it was simply, my words, for those who can't eat it only, then that would render it invalid.
Right.
Va'amai, and why is that the case? Do we say that? Ha stama la'ochlav kai. Here we might say it was done for the purpose of those who could eat it. Elashani heiche de amar me heiche de lo amar. But there's a difference between where it was stated orally and where it wasn't said orally. Hachanami, here too. Shani heiche de amar me heiche de lo amar. Here too, we might say that it's different from where it's said orally, in other words, versus where it's not said. Now, Amarle Mide area. So he says back to him, Rava, can you make really any comparison there? Bishlema hatam. That's acceptable there in that case. Kama de lo akarle b'shchita. Because there he didn't uproot it, undermine it, okay, initially at the act of slaughter. Stame, okay, vadai lishmo kai, because he basically, okay, it was not undetermined, all right, and therefore it's clearly going to be for its purpose, and that's how it, so to speak, stands. Ella hacha, but here in our case, stame la'ochlav kai, is it undetermined, okay, that it's for those who are going to eat it, and that's what status it's going to remain? Dilma, all right, perhaps, mim shechei hani, perhaps those people who were originally signed up to eat it, okay, remove themselves. They withdrew. Va'ate achrine umemne aluhe. And others came, and then they registered for it. Okay? So the Gemara says, skipping achrine, the others, Titnan, as taught elsewhere in a Mishnah, Nimnin umoshchin et yedehem mimenu ad sheyishchat. That one can register as well as withdraw themselves, their hands, in other words, right from that group, okay, and up until the time that the korban is actually slaughtered. Ibayalahu. So they asked now again, another question in the academy. Pesach sheshchato b'shar yamot hashana b'shinui ba'alim. Say we have a korban pesach, an animal, okay, that's slaughtered another time, but it changed ownership. The father was going to slaughter it. He owned the animal, the lamb, And between the time that he designated it as the Korban Pesach and the holiday, he was niftar. And now the son owns it. Okay, what's the situation? Okay, Shinui Ba'alim Kishinui Kodesh Dami. Do we say then that a change in ownership is like a change in its sacred status? Umachshirle, okay, and therefore we can say it's valid, olo or not. Amar Rav Papa, says Rav Papa, Amrita Lishma'ata, Kame de Rava. We said this lesson before Rava. Ho'il v'shinui kodesh poslo bismano. Since we say that a change in its consecrated status invalidates it in its time, v'shinui ba'alim poslo bismano, and the change in ownership would invalidate it in the appropriate time. Ma shinui kodesh sheposlo bismano, the same way that a change in its consecrated status invalidates it at its appropriate time. Machshiro might make it viable, right? La'achar zmano, after its time. Okay, fine. You can't say that animal might be the Korban Pesach, so instead I can use it after Pesach for Shlomim, right? Afshinui ba'alim sheposlo bismano. So likewise, a change in ownership that's going to invalidate it at its appropriate time, machshiro la'achar zmano, will render it valid after its time. Okay? Va'amar li, and he said to me, lo, that's not the case. Im amart b'shinui kodesh, shekain psulo begufo. If you're going to say that a change in its consecrated status renders it invalid in and of itself, v'yeshno ba'arba avodot, and we have 4 different avodos, 4 different rites, right? 4 different practices. V'yeshno la'achar mita, and we have a situation that after the death of the owner, v'yeshno b'tzibur k'biachid, and we have a change in situation when it goes from being a community korban to a private korban. Tomar b'shinui ba'alim, are you going to say when there's a change in ownership, de'ein psulo begufo, that there is no invalidation of the korban itself? Ve'eino ba'arba avodot, or there's no change because of the avodos? Ve'eino le'achar mita, or there's no change after a death? Ve'eino b'tzibur k'biyachid, and there's no change, therefore, after in its status, going from a communal offering to a private offering, or vice versa. Okay? Well, given all those questions, that's where we're going to tune in tomorrow. Okay? All right, and see what's the answer is going to be. All right, and that's where we'll pick up. Okay, I didn't see how